I arrived at the country house of E.N.M. in Finland, at whose house in St. Petersburg we had of late often had our meetings. G and about 8 of our people were there. In the evening the talk went on our attempts to tell about our lives. G was very harsh and sarcastic, as though he was trying to provoke now one, now another of us, and in particular he emphasised our cowardice and the laziness of our fault. I was particularly affected when he began to repeat in front of everyone something I had told him in absolute confidence, what I thought of Dr. S. What he said was very unpleasant for me principally, because I had always condemned such talk in others. I think it was about 10 o'clock that he called me, Dr. S. and Z into a small separate room. We sat on the floor Turkish style, and G began to explain and to show us certain postures and physical movements. I could not help noticing that there were an astonishing assurance and precision in all his movements, although the movements and postures themselves did not present any particular problem, and a good gymnast could have done them without exceptional difficulty. I had never had any pretensions to the role of an athlete, but I could imitate them all outwardly. G explained that although a gymnast could of course do these movements, the gymnast would do them in a different way from him, and that he did them in a special way with muscles relaxed. Afterwards G again passed to the question why we could not tell the story of our lives, and with this the miracle began. I can say with complete assurance that G did not use any kind of external methods, that is, he gave me no narcotics, nor did he hypnotise me by any of the known methods. It all started with my beginning to hear his thoughts. We were sitting in a small room with a carpetless wooden floor, as it happens in country houses. I sat opposite G, and Dr. S and Z at either side. G spoke of our features, of our inability to see or to speak the truth. His words perturbed me very much, and suddenly I noticed that among the words which he was saying to us all, there were thoughts which were intended for me. I caught one of these thoughts and replied to it, speaking aloud in the ordinary way. G nodded to me and stopped speaking. There was a fairly long pause. He sat still, saying nothing. After a while I heard his voice inside me, as it were in the chest near the heart. He put a definite question to me. I looked at him. He was sitting and smiling. His question provoked in me a very strong emotion, but I answered him in the affirmative. "Why did he say that?" asked G, looking in turn at Z and Dr. S. "Did I ask him anything?" And he at once put another still more difficult question to me in the same way as before, and I again answered it in a natural voice. Z and S were visibly astonished at what was taking place, especially Z. This conversation, if it can be called a conversation, proceeded in this fashion for not less than half an hour. G put questions to me without words, and I answered them, speaking in the usual way. I was very agitated by the things G said to me, and the things he asked me which I cannot transmit. The matter was concerned with certain conditions which I had either to accept or leave the work. G gave me a month's time. I refused the time and said that no matter how difficult what he demanded was, I would carry it out at once, but G insisted on the month's time. At length he got up and we went out to the veranda. On the other side of the house was another large veranda where the rest of our people were sitting. What transpired after this I can say very little about, although the chief things happened after G was speaking with Z and S. Then something he said about me affected me very strongly, and I sprang up from my chair and went into the garden. From there I went into the forest. I walked about there for a long time in the dark, wholly in the power of the most extraordinary thoughts and feelings. Sometimes it seemed to me that I had found something, at other times I lost it again. This went on for 1 or 2 hours. Finally, at the moment of what felt like the climax of contradictions and of inner turmoil, there flashed through my mind a thought, following which I very quickly came to a clear and right understanding of all G had said, and of my own position. I saw that G was right, that what I considered to be firm and reliable in myself in reality did not exist. But I had found something else. I knew that he would not believe me, and that he would laugh at me if I showed him this other thing. But for myself, it was indubitable, and what happened later showed that I was right. For a long time I sat and smoked in some kind of glade. When I returned to the house it was already dark on the small veranda. Thinking that everyone had gone to bed, I went to my own room and went to bed myself. As a matter of fact, G and the others were at that time having supper on the large veranda. A little while after I had gone to bed, a strange excitement again began in me. My pulse began to beat forcibly, and I again heard G's voice in my chest. On this occasion I not only heard, but I replied mentally, and G heard me and answered me. There was something very strange in this conversation. I tried to find something that would confirm it as a fact, but could find nothing. And after all, it could have been imagination or a waking dream, because although I tried to ask G something of a concrete nature that would have left no doubt about the conversation or his participation in it, I could not invent anything weighty enough. And certain questions I asked him, and which he answered, I could have asked and answered myself. I even had the impression that he avoided concrete answers, which later might serve as proofs, and to one or two of my questions he intentionally gave indefinite answers. But the feeling that it was a conversation was very strong, and entirely new and unlike anything else. After one long pause, G asked me something that at once put me all on the alert, then stopped as if waiting for an answer. What he said suddenly put a stop to all my thoughts and feelings. It was not fear, at least not a conscious fear when one knows that one is afraid, but I was all shivering, and something literally paralysed me completely, so that I could not articulate a single word, although I made terrible efforts, wishing to give an affirmative reply. I felt that G was waiting, and that he would not wait long. "Well, you are tired now," he said at last. "We will leave it till another time." I began to say something. I think I asked him to wait, to give me a little time to get accustomed to this thought. "Another time," said his voice. "Sleep," and his voice stopped. I could not go to sleep for a long time. In the morning, as I came out onto the little terrace where we had sat the evening before, G was sitting in the garden 20 yards away near a round table. There were 3 of our people with him. "Ask him what happened last night," said G. For some reason this made me angry. I turned and walked towards the terrace. As I reached it, I again heard G's voice in my chest. "Stop." I stopped and turned towards G. He was smiling. "Where are you going? Sit down here," he said in his ordinary voice. I sat with him, but I could say nothing, nor did I want to talk. At the same time I felt a kind of extraordinary clarity of thought, and I decided to try to concentrate on certain problems which had seemed to me to be particularly difficult. The thought came to my mind that in this unusual state I might perhaps find answers to questions which I could not find in the ordinary way. I began to think about the first triad of the ray of creation, about the 3 forces which made one. What could they mean? Can we define them? Can we realise their meaning? Something began to formulate itself in my head, but just as I tried to translate this into words, everything disappeared. Will, consciousness, and what was the third, I asked myself. It seemed to me that if I could name the third, I would at once understand everything else. "Leave it," said G aloud. I turned my eyes towards him and he looked at me. "That is a very long way away yet," he said. "You cannot find the answer now. Better think of yourself, of your work." The people sitting with us looked at us in perplexity. G had answered my thoughts. Then something very strange began that lasted the whole day and afterwards. We stayed in Finland 3 days longer. During these 3 days there were very many talks about the most varied subjects, and I was in an unusual emotional state all the time, which sometimes began to be burdensome. "How can this be got rid of? I cannot bear it any more," I asked G. "Do you want to go to sleep?" said G. "Certainly not," I said. "Then what are you asking about? This is what you wanted. Make use of it. You are not asleep at this moment." I do not think that this was altogether true. I undoubtedly slept at some moments. Many things that I said at that time must have surprised my companions in this strange adventure very much, and I was surprised at many things myself. Many things were like sleep. Many things had no relation whatever to reality. Undoubtedly I invented a lot. Afterwards it was very strange for me to remember the things I had said. At length we went to St. Petersburg. G went to Moscow, and we went to the Nikolaevsky station straight from the Finland station. A fairly large company had met together to see him off. He went. But the miraculous was still far from ended. There were new and very strange phenomena again late in the evening of that day, and I conversed with him while seeing him in the compartment of the train going to Moscow. After this there followed a strange period of time. It lasted about 3 weeks, and during this period from time to time I saw sleeping people. This requires a particular explanation. 2 or 3 days after G's departure, I was walking along the Trotsky Street, and suddenly I saw that the man who was walking towards me was asleep. There could be no doubt whatever about this. Although his eyes were open, he was walking along obviously immersed in dreams which ran like clouds across his face. It entered my mind that if I could look at him long enough I should see his dreams, that is, I should understand what he was seeing in his dreams. But he passed on. After him came another also sleeping. A sleeping Ouspensky went by with 2 sleeping passengers. Suddenly I found myself in the position of the prince and the sleeping princess. Everyone around me was asleep. It was an indubitable and distinct sensation. I realised what it meant that many things could be seen with our eyes which we do not usually see. These sensations lasted for several minutes. Then they were repeated very weakly on the following day. But I at once made the discovery that by trying to remember myself, I was able to intensify and prolong these sensations for so long as I had energy enough not to be diverted, that is, not to allow things and everything around me to attract my attention. When attention was diverted, I ceased to see sleeping people, because I had obviously gone to sleep myself. I told only a few of our people of these experiments, and 2 of them, when they tried to remember themselves, had similar experiences. Afterwards everything became normal. I could not give myself a clear account of what exactly had taken place, but everything in me had been turned upside down, and there is no doubt that in the things I said and thought during those 3 weeks there was a good deal of fantasy. But I had seen myself, that is, I had seen things in myself that I had never seen before. There could be no doubt about it, and although I afterwards became the same as I had been before, I could not help knowing that this had been, and I could forget nothing.